Hey guys, James here, and welcome back to my channel. If you guys are new here, this channel is all about sharing my lifelong love of cars with you guys. Today we are in the Tesla Model Y dual motor long range with the induction wheels. Back in the day, I had a 2015 Volkswagen e-Golf, and it was an amazing little commuter. So fun, so practical, so cheap to run. So when the opportunity came up to borrow my friend's Model Y, this car, for 2 months, I jumped on it. Over the past month, with my friend's permission, I've been driving the snot out of this car as a daily driver and as a road trip vehicle from San Diego to Salt Lake City and back. In today's video, I'm only going to focus on the driving experience of the Model Y because as a driving enthusiast, that's the first thing I pay attention to when I hop into a new car. Setting off in the Model Y, as with any electric vehicle, the first thing you notice about it is that the drivetrain is completely smooth. The Model Y long range dual motor gets to 60 miles an hour in about 4.8 seconds. And mind you, that's a really different 4.8 seconds when you compare it to, say, a gasoline-powered car. In a gasoline-powered car, when you accelerate hard, everything vibrates and makes noise, and it feels like the car is working a lot harder. You're stressing the mechanical bits of the vehicle. By contrast, in an EV, because the drivetrain is so silent, psychologically, you're able to access that kind of acceleration much more frequently without feeling like you're destroying your car from the inside out. You just punch it and off you go. It's it's so ridiculously effortless. Like with other Teslas, the brake pedal actually does not control regen braking. It is actually purely friction brakes. All of the regen braking is controlled by the accelerator pedal. So when you lift off the pedal, then the car will slow down using regen braking. And there are two modes for that. The first one, standard, gives you the maximum amount of regen braking available. It's basically what you need if you want to do one pedal driving. There's also a mode that gives you less regen braking, and that's handy if you want a particularly smooth driving experience and you don't mind getting on the friction brakes far more often. If you've driven other hybrids or EVs before, chances are that the regen braking was controlled by the brake pedal. So how come Tesla does things differently? The acceleration of the vehicle and the regen braking are both performed by the motors. The problem with combining the regen braking with the friction brakes in the brake pedal is that we're bringing together two different systems, right? Two completely unrelated systems. It's the motor / generator on the one hand and the friction brakes on the other hand, and they're both being controlled by the same pedal. And that is a recipe for a very unpredictable, unnatural feeling brake pedal. And that's why, even though it seems a little unintuitive to not blend the regen braking with the friction brakes, it actually makes for a far smoother driving experience. And I think Tesla absolutely made the right call on this one. I think the regenerative braking in this car is done really well, where it's very controllable with the accelerator pedal. The calibration that Tesla did is very intuitive. It's just, you get in it and pretty much immediately you can drive the car smoothly with that accelerator pedal in one pedal driving. The friction brake pedal is a little bit more of a mixed bag. When you are using the friction brakes lightly just to supplement the regen braking a little bit, it works really well under that circumstance. The problem comes in when you brake hard in the Model Y. In that circumstance, it really feels like the friction brakes are not up to the task. Brake, 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 brake. Oh, okay. As Jeremy Clarkson would say, a lot of poo came out. Overall then, I would say the braking performance of the Model Y is really good in light to medium braking because it's so smooth and so intuitive. And then in an emergency braking situation, you just have to get used to the fact that you're gonna have to push that brake pedal harder than you expect to get that brake response that you want. Now let's talk about the steering. Look at the steering wheel. It's one of the chunkiest steering wheels on the market, and it's made of this kind of weird vegan leather, I guess. Now, good steering is made up of a bunch of different elements, and I'll go through each of them and tell you guys what the Model Y is like. I'll start with some of the good stuff. So the precision of the steering, I think, is actually really good. The whole vehicle responds in a way that you're like, yes, this is the input that I gave the vehicle, and the Model Y is doing exactly that. And that's really great. I mean, that helps the steering feel more intuitive. Unfortunately, there are a few factors that make it less intuitive or less easy to use. One of those factors is the absurdly quick 10.3 to 1 steering ratio. So when you go into a curve like this, it is kind of nice to have that quick ratio. I mean, you don't have to go hand over hand so much to get the turning that you want. But on the freeway though, it just contributes to a lot more fatigue because you're constantly trying to correct the car's path within your lane. TeslaMotorsClub.com says that the 10.3 to 1 steering ratio is like a sports car. A Porsche 911 has a 14 to 1 or a 15 to 1 steering ratio. A Ferrari F430 has a 16 to 1 steering ratio. More modern Ferraris like a 458 or a 488 have 12 to 1 steering ratios. I have yet to find a single sports car that has a 10 to 1 steering ratio like this Model Y. The steering doesn't really center itself very strongly when you're going straight on the freeway, let's say. So that kind of adds to the wandering feel of that front end when you're on the freeway. When you go off center in the Model Y, the way that the steering loads up is not quite as natural as it is in a hydraulic rack or a very good electric steering rack. Between the quick ratio, the really fat steering wheel, and the lack of feel, it's very video gamey in my opinion. One good thing is that the steering weight settings are actually really great. So I really like standard or sport. I liked sport at first because I felt like that gave me a little more control given how quick the steering ratio was. But now I've learned to like standard because I've gotten more accustomed to the quick steering ratio, so I can operate it with more precision without that artificial amount of weight in the steering. I know I'm nitpicking a lot about the details of the Model Y steering system, but the truth is that it is totally adequate and it really gets the job done for a small-ish or medium-ish sized SUV that's just hauling 5 to 7 people and all of your stuff. On a related note to steering is handling, and the Model Y long-range dual motor handles really well. It's really impressive. You really feel that low center of mass, and with the fairly stiff suspension, everything feels very taut and controlled. In the corners, the Model Y feels really balanced, up to about 7/10, at which point the chassis starts to whisper to you, I'm gonna understeer, and eventually it does. But up to that point, it actually feels really good and very predictable. In part, these handling characteristics are due to a really firm suspension setup, and the flip side of that, of course, is that the ride is not particularly good, especially with these induction wheels. My friend who owns this car says that she loves pretty much everything about this car except for the ride, and she regrets getting those upgraded induction wheels. And I gotta agree with her. If you are ordering a Model Y, stick with the standard wheels, and if you hate the way they look, just take off those hubcaps or replace them with an aftermarket hubcap that looks a lot better. Alright, what are my overall thoughts on the Model Y driving experience? Tesla intended the Model Y to be a fairly sporty SUV for the masses, and it really succeeds at that mission. The acceleration is plentiful and there's so much power for the average person. The chassis is also really willing to dive into corners as long as you're not going too fast. The steering is super quick, which, again, is not always the best for sporty driving, but it does feel sporty to the average person. The brakes are probably the one aspect of the Model Y long range that doesn't really feel sporty, because when you really hammer on that brake pedal, it doesn't really give you the response that you expect. How does the Model Y compare to some of its competitors? Well, if you want a sporty, small to mid-size-ish electric SUV, then the Model Y is an amazingly good choice. But you should also check out the Mustang Mach-E, because that's also a really good option if you like that slightly sportier feel. On the other hand, if you want something that's more comfortable, a little bit more cushy, check out the Ioniq 5. I think that's going to be your best bet. And finally, if you want to optimize for sportiness in your SUV, and you're willing to lose some interior room, and you're willing to consider gasoline-powered options, then the Porsche Macan will completely obliterate the Model Y when it comes to the driving experience. This is one of those vehicles that can be considered one of those ultimate all-arounder vehicles. It's pretty sporty, it can schlep all of your stuff and, up to 7 people, It's an amazing all-arounder. And in the remaining weeks that I have with this car, I'm really excited to just continue getting to know this car, learning more about it, and making videos to share with you guys what I'm learning. But that's it for today's video, you guys. And if you liked this video or you found it helpful, if you could hit that like button down below, that really helps out this little channel that I've got going on here. Also hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any of the videos that I have coming out. I do car reviews, I talk about car tech, really anything that interests me in the world of cars, and hopefully will interest you too. But that's it for today's video. Again, my name is James. Thank you so much again for watching, and I will see you in the next video.